Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you're getting sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask you hit thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. I apologize in advance for the lighting. Obviously, a work in progress, so bear with me on that. But I wanted to bring this video, as I promised, prior to the big federal elections coming up here on Monday, October 21st. I wanted to recap what the housing platforms are for these various parties, sort of my thoughts on them, and hopefully that sort of gives you some guidance on who you want to vote for. I'm not going to get into the weeds of who I'm voting for or who you should vote for. I'll certainly lay it out and give you my thoughts and analysis on those policies and what I think they mean for the Canadian real estate market. And again, hopefully that helps you make a decision, an educated decision at that. First, quick little thing on the Vancouver housing market. Sort of continue to be really, I think the market is trying to figure out which direction it's going in. Certainly find it entertaining reading all the big bank economists' reports on housing recovery, and price acceleration is going to continue from here, and we're going to hit higher prices moving forward. And well, I think that certainly when you look at it from a statistical standpoint, the increase in activity certainly implies that in some aspects, but there's other aspects where I'm left kind of scratching my head and wondering, are we about to enter a phase of temporarily to midterm, increased activity and rising prices, or are we on the cusp of something much more significant? And what that might be is, I hear stories of, what we're seeing is it was real, still downwards pressure and significant weakness in the higher end luxury market, still coming down, but the entry level affordable product, it has stabilized and activity is picking up. We're starting to see some multiple offers in there. And that seems to be the case, I think, across a lot of Canada right now. But I'm hearing one of the largest developers here in Vancouver just laid off a whole bunch of employees. If you look at the BC employment numbers, the labor market in BC is contracted for 4 consecutive months. That's the first time it's done that since 2012, 2013. So are we on the cusp of a full-blown recession? Are we on the cusp of increasing housing activity on the backs of lower interest rates and monetary policy still being stimulative? I think that remains to be seen, and obviously I think what happens in these federal elections could certainly impact some of that. So without further ado, let's just sort of jump into it. What we have first and foremost, I think, is the Liberals obviously going for re-election. Basically what they're proposing is a 1% national speculation tax. They said the speculation tax will basically mirror BC government's speculation tax. It's going to be 1% annually on non-residents or non-Canadian citizens that don't utilize their home for at least 6 months of the year. So that home either has to be used as a primary residence, or it's got to be rented out for 6 months a year. Otherwise, you're going to get hit with a 1% tax. And they basically said they're going to model the BC government's speculation tax that we've already brought in. The Liberal government has also said that they are going to increase the first-time homebuyers incentive. Then they unveiled this program through CMHC a number of months ago. And that was supposed to be capped at a max purchase price of $480,000, and you could only leverage 4 times your income. And of course, you'd basically share part of the upside with the CMHC. So basically, as an example, CMHC would lend you up to 10% of your purchase price. They would basically, they're basically helping you with the down payment, but as part of that, they want part of the upside when you go to sell, or the downside. And so it kind of, in my opinion, that program was sort of unveiled to not be stimulative based on everything CMHC has tried to do. And what the Liberal government has come out and said well, because it's election season, what we're going to do is we're going to boost that. We're not going to allow you to borrow 5 times your income. And if you live in Vancouver, Victoria, or Toronto, i.e. the 3 most frothiest, most expensive and unaffordable housing markets in Canada, we're going to boost the first-time homebuyer incentive from $480,000 to $789,000. So they're basically proposing that first-time homebuyers should be allowed or should be incentivized to spend upwards of $800,000 on a first-time home. Obviously, I think that's pretty insane when you think about it, but this is the world that we now live in. So I think on the whole of it, the Liberal policy measures, I actually don't think are going to be stimulative for the market. I actually think they're kind of a net neutral. I think that the national speculation tax, I don't see it having drastic impact on the market. It might discourage some foreign investment. But I think a lot of that in foreign investment has already pulled back. I don't think it was as large as it was made out to be. I think a lot of the foreign investment that's already active here in Canada, they already have Canadian citizenships or permanent residencies. So, and there's various ways around the taxes, renting it out for 6 months. So I don't really see that being hugely impactful. I think that the first-time home buyers program will get some uptake in, Vancouver and Toronto and Victoria. But again, the idea of sort of sharing part of your capital gains with the government, I think it kind of negates some of the desirability of using that program. So I think that on the face of it, the Liberal housing policy measures are kind of meh. I don't really see them being stimulative. I don't really see them curbing a whole lot of demand. On the sort of next side, the Conservative government side, who I would argue is kind of 1-2 with the Liberal government in terms of who's actually going to win. Conservative government is saying they're going to reduce or fix the stress test. Now we have to understand and unpack that. They're kind of vague in what they were saying or what they were going to do, but you have to understand that the way that the regulations are set up is the Conservative government can actually only change the policy measures on the insured side, i.e. which CMHC is set up. They cannot change what OSFI regulates. OSFI is an independent financial regulator, and the Conservative government has no power to change anything that OSFI is doing. So OSFI, again, is an independent regulator. So when the Conservative government says they're going to fix the stress test, what they're meaning is they're going to work on the insured mortgage side, i.e. less than a 20% down payment. What I believe this fixed means and what they've kind of hinted towards is basically reducing the stress test qualifying rate, i.e. it's 2% above your qualifying rate or the overnight interest rate of 5.34%. So they'll probably lower that to maybe your qualifying rate becomes 1% above your borrowing rate. So if you're borrowing on a mortgage of say 2.7 today, maybe they change it to 3.7. So they'll lower that hurdle for people that are using insured mortgages. They've also said that they're going to try to work with OSFI, maybe encourage them to change some of the rules on renewals. People that are renewing their mortgages, I think that's actually probably a beneficial thing. I think that if you're renewing your mortgage, you should have the flexibility to go in and try other lenders. So I actually like that change, that tweak to it. But they've also said that the big one that they get all the headlines is they're saying the Conservative government is going to push amortizations to 30 years, and obviously I think that's going to be extremely stimulative. Well, not extremely stimulative, but it's going to be stimulative because it actually will increase borrowing power by 12%. Increasing amortization from 25 to 30 years would increase the borrowing power by 12%. But again, that 30-year amortization, the Conservative government only has the ability to push amortizations on the insured mortgage side. So uninsured mortgages, which is 70% of the market last year. So the number of, put up this chart here, basically shows the drastic change that we've seen in the number of uninsured and insured mortgages. Basically, you're seeing rapid growth in uninsured mortgages and a rapid decline in insured mortgages. And there's various reasons because of that. And one of the main reasons is because home prices have grown exponentially in Canada, and any purchase above $1 million becomes an uninsured mortgage, which means you have to put down 20%. They won't insure a purchase price above $1 million. Well, because home prices have gone up so much, most people have to put down 20%, or even, even if it's below 800, say $1 million, is people are putting down at least 20% because the mortgage payments are becoming so burdensome that you have to put a larger down payment. So a lot of people aren't doing insured mortgages anymore. They're doing uninsured mortgages. So insured mortgages last year made up 30% of new originations. So on the face of all this, to sort of summarize the Conservative housing platform, I would argue that it is more stimulative, certainly more stimulative than the Liberal government housing platform. Now, the Conservative is obviously painting the narrative that the 30-year amortization and the loosening of the stress test is beneficial for the first-time home buyer, and we're helping you enter the housing market. But again, I would argue that first-time home buyers do not need more stimulation. We don't need the what we're seeing, again, even in Vancouver, is the activity, the increase in housing activity that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 months that everybody's talking about is happening at the entry-level, affordable pockets of the market. So by increasing a stimulus and buyer demand at the entry level, I think that's just going to put more fuel on the fire. So I don't think that stimulating the entry-level segment of the market is going to do anything. I think it's going to make matters worse. It's going to create more competition at those various levels. So I think, if you're a first-time home buyer, I actually think this works probably, might help you temporarily, but I think the fact that it's likely to push home prices up, that it's probably going to negate any sort of benefits that it brings in the short term. So I think this is more beneficial to actually home sellers. I would call this not a home buyer's boost, but a home seller's boost, because I think they're going to be the true beneficiaries of increasing, amortizations and loosening of the stress test for insured mortgages. It's funny because everybody's talking about, stress test, it's hurting first-time buyers, it's not allowing them to get in the markets. If you actually look at residential mortgage credit growth, it's actually today growing at a faster pace today than it did prior to the B20 mortgage stress test being introduced. And the fact that Canadian households are the most indebted in the world, in the G20, suggests that I don't think that credit has been too loose or too tight. If anything, credit has been too loose for too long, hence the elevated levels of home prices and the sky-high levels of household indebtedness. So I think by loosening credit and boosting the housing market further is just going to create long-term, it's going to create more instability. But it's politics. This is what they do. And last but not least, the NDP government, they are proposing they're going to build 500,000 affordable units over the next 10 years. Everybody sort of makes that pledge. They also want to do the 30-year amortization for uninsured mortgages, so very similar to the Conservative government. And they're also saying that they're going to create a foreign buyers tax nationally for non-residents. So again, very similar to what we've done in BC, the BC government. So to just sort of summarize, all the policies and my thoughts on it. Again, I'm not leaning any direction. I'm certainly not going to denounce who I'm going to vote for. I think that it's very interesting. I think that if I had to take a guess, I had to place my bets. I actually think that the Liberal government is going to get reelected. Again, I'm personally not a huge Trudeau fan, but I think that he gets reelected on the premise that I think that the Conservatives, I actually think that they elected or put into power the wrong guy. I think there could have been many better candidates, and they probably would have done much better in the polling. I just don't think that Scheer is I don't think he's sold himself personally, and I think it's been a really bad PR campaign, and I think that the Canadian populace is shifting so far left that I just think he's lost that important factor. And that's me personally. Again, that's not saying that I'm voting for Trudeau. I'm not voting for Andrew Scheer. What I am saying is that that's my hunch. And to summarize the policies, I think that the Liberal government's policies are probably the least stimulative of those three parties. I think that the Conservative government and the NDP are probably I would say the Conservatives are the most stimulative in terms of they want to loosen the policies. They're not proposing any foreign buyers tax or any sort of speculation tax like the Liberals and NDP are. So that's kind of how I would summarize your policies. But love to hear your thoughts on what you think on these housing policies, these housing measures, and perhaps your guesses as to who gets in. I actually think that Trudeau will get in, but I think it will be under a minority government. I think that the Conservatives will come in and take a share of Trudeau's pie, so to speak. And those are my predictions. So anyways, hope that helped. Otherwise, see you next week.